Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the boldest and most shocking chapters of the Russia-Ukraine war. A chapter that no analyst predicted, no general planned for, and no one believed could ever succeed, yet it did. I'm talking about Ukraine's incursion into Russia's Kursk Oblast on August 6, 2024. An operation that turned the tables, shattered myths about Russian military superiority, and left Moscow scrambling to defend its own soil. This wasn't just a raid. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was an invasion that lasted nearly 7 months, inflicted staggering casualties, and exposed Russia's most catastrophic military weaknesses. And in today's video, we're going to break it all down. What happened, why it worked, and what it means for the future of the war. So buckle up, because this story is more explosive than anyone could have imagined. The invasion nobody saw coming when Ukraine launched its surprise cross-border attack into Kursk. The world gasped. Military analysts shook their heads in disbelief. Free could Ukraine, already stretched thin defending its homeland, possibly sustain operations on Russian soil? The move seemed impossible, reckless even, but that's exactly what made it brilliant. Because within days, this impossible gamble turned into one of the most improbable successes of the entire war. By the time the dust settled, Ukraine had inflicted more casualties on Russia in Kursk than in almost any other single campaign of the conflict. Over 77,000 Russian soldiers killed or wounded, according to Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrskyi. To put that in perspective, that's more losses than Russia suffered in the entire First Chechen War. And it happened in a single region that Moscow thought was fully under control. But the devastation didn't stop with manpower. Ukraine smashed Russian hardware like it was made of paper. More than 7,000 units of equipment destroyed or captured, including 211 tanks, 1083 armored vehicles, and 907 artillery systems. Each destroyed tank or artillery piece wasn't just a battlefield loss. It represented millions of dollars, months of production, and years of logistical planning gone up in smoke. How did Ukraine pull it off? The genius of Kursk lay in how it started. Not with a massive armored assault, not with endless artillery barrages. It began with shadows. On August 4, just 2 days before the main assault, Ukrainian special operations teams slipped quietly into Kursk, groups of only 6 soldiers at a time, moving under the cover of night, hiding in forests and gathering critical intel. This was a masterclass in deception. Russia's entire border defense plan was based on the assumption that any invasion would be massive, obvious, and slow. What they got instead was surgical, stealthy, and lightning fast. So when the real attack came at dawn on August 6, Russian defenses collapsed almost instantly. Ukrainian forces sliced through weak conscript units, bypassed unprepared checkpoints, and within days controlled nearly 500 square miles of Russian territory. Imagine that. The Russian military, the same one that claimed it could conquer Kiev in 3 days, couldn't even hold its own border villages. The strategic masterstroke. Why Kursk? Why then? The summer of 2024 had been brutal for both sides. Russia was planning a new offensive aimed at Ukraine's Sumy and Kharkiv regions, but Ukraine saw what was coming. Instead of waiting to be attacked, they flipped the script. They struck first. This forced Russia to abandon its plans entirely. Tens of thousands of Russian troops earmarked for the Sumy offensive were suddenly redirected north to defend Kursk. President Zelensky even claimed that 60,000 Russian troops were pulled out of Donbas to deal with Kursk, giving Ukrainian forces much-needed breathing room. Think about the domino effect. Pressure eased in Donbas, artillery fire dropped in Zaporizhia, and even NATO noticed Russia thinning out forces in Kaliningrad, its westernmost territory. All because Ukraine opened a new front that Moscow never anticipated. Russia's slow and chaotic response, the most shocking part? Russia barely responded in the beginning. For the first month, counterattacks were sporadic, clumsy, and uncoordinated. Moscow's command structure was too rigid, too centralized, too slow to adapt. It took a full month before Russia mounted anything resembling a counteroffensive, and even then it was weak.
Real progress didn't come until 3 to 5 months later, and only after Russia resorted to bringing in foreign troops. This delay wasn't just embarrassing.
It was a glaring sign of a deeper rot inside Russia's military doctrine. A system built for rigid Soviet-style warfare crumbled when faced with Ukraine's flexible, adaptive tactics. The global shockwave beyond the battlefield. Kursk shook the entire world. By mid-2024, many Western governments were starting to believe Ukraine was losing steam. Aid was stalling. Public opinion was fading. People were asking, can Ukraine really win this war? Then Kursk happened. Suddenly, images of Ukrainian tanks rolling through Russian villages filled global headlines. Reports of humanitarian aid centers being set up for Russian civilians by Ukrainian soldiers flooded social media. The message was clear. Ukraine wasn't just surviving. It was capable of launching bold, offensive, complex operations inside Russia itself. Western governments took note. Almost overnight, the tone changed. Ukraine gained access to more advanced long-range weapons, fewer restrictions on using them, and renewed commitments of aid. And perhaps most importantly, Kursk shattered the myth of Russia's nuclear red lines. Putin's bluff gets exposed for years. Putin had warned, if Ukraine attacked Russian soil with Western weapons, nuclear retaliation would follow. But in Kursk, that's exactly what happened. Western-supplied vehicles and equipment rolled into Russian territory. Ukrainian troops occupied Russian towns. And guess what? No nuclear response, no apocalypse, just silence. Putin's bluff was called. And once the world realized those red lines were just empty threats, everything changed. Suddenly, the U.S. gave the green light for ATACMS strikes inside Russia. Britain expanded Storm Shadow use. Germany lifted restrictions. Putin's biggest weapon, fear, had been disarmed. Russia's humiliation, North Korean troops, but Kursk wasn't just about weapons. It also revealed Russia's manpower crisis in the most humiliating way possible. In October 2024, Moscow brought in 11,000 North Korean soldiers to defend its own territory. Yes, you heard that right. The so-called mighty Russian army needed help from one of the poorest and most isolated militaries on Earth. And the results? A disaster. Within 3 months, nearly 40% of North Korean troops were killed or wounded. They were hopelessly outmatched by Ukrainian drones, overwhelmed by modern surveillance, and crippled by language barriers that made coordination nearly impossible. Ukrainian forces crushed them so badly that reports suggest they had to be pulled off the front lines just to retrain. For Putin, the image was devastating. Russian soil defended not by proud Russian soldiers, but by foreign mercenaries dying in droves. Technology and psychology, but Kursk wasn't just about brute force. It was also about innovation and psychology. Ukraine used advanced electronic warfare to scramble Russian missiles, sending them hundreds of yards off target. Drone swarms gave Ukrainian forces near constant eyes in the sky, making every Russian move predictable. And then there was the psychological war. Ukrainian soldiers opened aid centers in occupied Russian towns, handing out food, medicine, and care. Civilians who expected Ukrainian Nazis, as Russian propaganda claimed, instead saw professionalism, compassion, and discipline. It was a brilliant propaganda strike. Not only did it soften local resistance, it also destroyed Moscow's narratives abroad. Kursk's lessons now. A year later, Ukraine only holds a small sliver of Kursk, about 4 square miles. But the impact of the operation can't be overstated. It proved that modern war isn't won just by numbers, tanks, or artillery. It's won by innovation, adaptability, and the courage to take risks. Yes, Ukraine paid a price. Logistical bottlenecks, equipment losses, and eventual withdrawals remind us that this wasn't a flawless victory. But strategically, Kursk was a turning point. It forced Russia to bleed tens of thousands of troops, exposed military weaknesses, and reignited Western support at a critical moment. Most importantly, it showed the world, and the Kremlin, that Ukraine isn't just fighting to survive. It's capable of rewriting the rules of war. Final thoughts: the Kursk incursion will be remembered not just as a battle, but as a message that numbers don't guarantee victory, that red lines mean nothing if you're willing to test them, and that even a smaller nation, when determined, innovative, and united, can challenge a global power on its own soil. And if Kursk taught us anything, it's this: the war in Ukraine is far from decided. Each move, each battle, each decision will shape not just the future of Eastern Europe, but the future of global geopolitics. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the conflicts shaping our world.